So, Joshua, chapter 20. We're going to read the whole thing. We're going to read the whole chapter. It's only 9 verses, so it's not really a big deal. It's not like Psalm 119 or anything, so for you, it's okay. So read with me then. Then the Lord said to Joshua, tell the Israelites to designate the cities of refuge as I instructed you through Moses, so that anyone who kills a person accidentally and unintentionally may flee there and find protection from the avenger of blood. When they flee to one of these cities, they are to stand at the entrance of the city gate and state their case before the elders of that city. Then the elders are to admit the fugitive into their city and provide a place to live among them. If the avenger of blood comes in pursuit, the elders must not surrender the fugitive, because the fugitive killed their neighbor unintentionally and without malice aforethought. They are to stay in that city until they have stood trial before the assembly and until the death of the high priest who is serving at that time. Then they may go back to their own home in the town from which they fled. So they set apart Kadesh in Galilee in the hill country of Naphtali, Shechem in the hill country of Ephraim, and Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, in the hill country of Judah. East of the Jordan, on the other side from Jericho, they designated Bezer in the wilderness on the plateau in the tribe of Reuben, Ramoth in Gilead in the tribe of Gad, and Golan in Bashan in the tribe of Manasseh. Any of the Israelites or any foreigner residing among them who killed someone accidentally could flee to these designated cities and not be killed by the avenger of blood prior to standing trial before the assembly. Can't you see just how much I have to pull from this passage to share with you today? Isn't it obvious? I have to be honest. Pretty much so every time that I have worked with another pastor in going through a book of the Bible, I always seem to get the duds. Just kidding, Tom, if you're watching this. Just kidding. Seriously, it seems to me like I get these ones where I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this? And yet, every single time, when I get to the point where I get up here, I'm like, oh man, there is so much that is going on that if we open our eyes and our hearts to see it, God just runs right through us. So, get ready. It's going to be a crazy ride. Maybe a little boring at times. No, it'll be exciting. It'll be fantastic. I'm preaching. It's super. So the cities of refuge. Now, the crazy thing is this. These things were dictated way back in the law, in Numbers and in Deuteronomy, when the Israelites are out there in the wilderness and the law is being given to them the first time and read to them the second time. They were these cities of refuge that were set up. They were to provide protection from the avenger of blood in the case of manslaughter. Now, manslaughter, okay, not murder, not intentional, premeditated murder, but that accidental, unintentional, without malice aforethought that happens. The stuff's like, oops, I killed someone, The idea is that sometimes stuff happens. We make mistakes. We didn't mean to do something bad. Something horrible happened. I have a really bad habit of that happening with me. I'll be messing around with somebody and all of a sudden they're bleeding and I'm like, oh man, I didn't mean that. Or I'll make this like off the cuff comment because I think it's funny and all of a sudden they're offended and I'm like, oh man, and we do this. It's part of who we are. We think, oh, this will be fine, this will be good, this will be whatever. And all of a sudden something bad happens. And then we're on the other side of it trying to make up for everything. So God sets up these cities of refuge for Israel and says, hey, if you have a situation where you accidentally injure or kill someone, there's a place where you can run to be protected from the avenger of blood. Now, the avenger of blood, we're all pretty familiar with what it is. You do something to me and I'm going to do something back to you. Now, a lot of times when we think about the blood feud or the vendetta, as it's called, we think of it kind of like that Hollywood situation where if I do something to you, me and my entire family or my entire gang or my clan or whatever, we're all trying to get you and your family, okay? But that's not the way that it was done in ancient Jewish civilization. No, the avenger of blood was a person within a family. It was a singular person who was responsible for the avenging of these situations. Now, for those of you Bible scholars out there, the avenger of blood was also the kinsman redeemer that the book of Ruth talks about, the person who was supposed to go out and redeem family members who have sold themselves into slavery or to redeem property that a family member had to sell in order to survive. So the avenger of blood and the kinsman redeemer were the same person. But the point is that they were the person with the resources and they were the person with the will in order to go out and take care of the family, to assert the family's rights inside the community. But the thing is this. Whenever you have somebody out there going for blood because their blood has been drawn, you can wind up with situations where somebody who was not guilty dies. So when you kill somebody accidentally, the Jewish law said, hey, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, bone for bone. You killed my family member, I'm supposed to kill you now. This is what we're supposed to do. But typically when you're angry, you're not thinking, hey, I'm going to kill you, but first, do you have anything to say? Do you want to, was it an accident? You don't do that. You're like, you killed so-and-so, I'm going to kill you. That's how it plays out. So the cities of refuge were established in order to allow someone to go and say, oh, it was an accident. We were just out doing such and so, and I bumped into a rock and it fell over, and I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for it to happen. This concept of cities of refuge, these places of sanctuary, they're not unique to Israeli culture. They're not. In fact, I was actually thinking that they might be. I was like, well, that's, giving an opportunity for people to go in an accident and plead their case seems very progressive and seems like something that God would do counterculturally to the other societies of that day. Because, honestly, that's what the Old Testament law was like. We look at it from our standpoint, we're like, wow, man, Old Testament God was angry God. He was no good. He was, he's really hard to deal with because he's all about vengeance and these things. But actually a professor of mine from seminary, he wrote a book called God Behaving Badly. And what he does is he goes through a whole bunch of situations where we look at what God does. And we're from our 20th century standpoint saying, oh, how could he? And yet he goes and compares it to the other cultures around them and says, hey, God was actually really progressive. What God was calling the Jews to do was completely different from the societies around them. And I thought this was going to be one of those things, and I was sorely disappointed because I found out that most of the ancient Near Eastern cultures had this concept of a city of refuge or sanctuary going on for them. Now, this is why. It is really common for us as humans when somebody hurts us to hurt them back, right? Or at least to want to hurt them back. So ancient cultures, as they started to become more and more civilized, they're like, hey, everybody is going after each other. He poked him in the eye, so now he's poking him in the eye, and he broke his arm, so now he's breaking. And, it's that whole eye for an eye makes the world go blind. And these cultures were like, we have to stop this. We have to find a way, otherwise we're just all going to be dead. Because we're all going to keep messing up and hurting each other. And if we just keep going after this, our civilization is going to collapse. So they created these laws regarding sanctuary, or if not sanctuary, remuneration for injury. Now, while the concept of sanctuary was not unique to Israel, there were some aspects of the Torah, of the Jewish law, that were unique compared to their neighbors. For example, offenses committed within the Jewish law. They weren't against the proverbial fabric of society. No, they were offenses against God himself. You know, you didn't just violate the social order. You violated God's will. You violated what he wanted you to do. So right there, that's a lot more intense. But to go along with that, when you wanted to appeal to the highest court, when you were in one of these other civilizations, you could only go to the king. All right? Now people are like, going to the king's pretty good. Well, yeah, it is, but these other societies still acknowledged there was God or gods above the king. But in Jewish law, the highest court you could appeal to was God himself, because at this stage of the game, he was the king. The Jews had a theocracy. God was the ultimate ruling body. So while the offenses could be directly against God, you could appeal directly to God as your arbiter. Now, another thing about the ancient Near Eastern cultures is that very frequently penalties depended on where you lay within the social strata of the day. You know, for example, a slave wouldn't get as much benefit as a free man. And, you know, your regular old free man wasn't going to have as much benefit as a rich noble. So you would have differing layers of penalty based on what you were. You know, if you were a slave, well, you did something wrong, kill you. It's fine, you're just a slave, whatever. But if you were noble, oh, well, we'll only slap you on the wrist. It won't be such a big deal. That wasn't the case in the Jewish law. In almost every instance, we see that everybody's equated the same thing. I mean, if you go back and you look at Judges there, at the end, it says, if somebody accidentally kills someone, they could flee to the city of refuge, regardless of whether they were an Israelite or a foreigner. Now, typically, foreigners weren't accorded any rights at all. But here in the law of Moses, in the Torah, foreigners, slaves, anyone were given equal access to justice. But perhaps more directly to what we're talking about today is the compensation, the concept of financial compensation for the loss of life or limb. In most of Israel's neighbors, if you did something wrong, then you could pay the person that you wronged, and that would make everything okay. You know, and that's pretty common for us today. You know, we think about, hey, there's a lawsuit and there's a settlement, right? Well, as far as the Jews were concerned, no. What you did, you took an eye, you lost an eye. You took a tooth, you lost a tooth. The concept was, hey, if you take this from me, this is the equivalent. This is the way that it should be. You know, if I'm losing a tooth, then you should lose a tooth as well. It's not, oh, you lost a tooth, I'm just going to give you $5. You know, that did not equate as far as God was concerned, because as far as God was concerned, life was precious in its completeness. So because of this need for a exact repayment for what was lost, it was necessary for the Hebrew society to have these cities of refuge. They had to be there, and they had to be part of the legal civic responsibilities, because if they didn't, and an innocent person was killed because they couldn't get access to refuge, then the entirety of Israel would be held accountable by God, because they were held together as a community. You know, think about the sin of Achan. When Achan sinned, God didn't just punish Achan. The entirety of the community suffered. God is for the whole people. The individuals within the people, but the whole people too. And we are supposed to work in tandem, in community with each other, because God is a communal being himself. So, the cities of refuge had to be there, because if they didn't, then there's the possibility of blood guilt coming on the entirety of the community, because somebody wouldn't have access to sanctuary. So let's say this. Hosea Hebrew, he's out there. He's chopping wood. He's with Irving Israelite. And the tree falls. And it tragically lands on and kills Irving. So Hosea Hebrew, he runs off to one of the cities of refuge so that he can explain that it was just a tragic accident and not an intentional murder. So what happens then is this. Hosea presents himself to the elders, who for whatever reason are always sitting at the gate of a city. never really understood that. Unless it's exactly 4 things like this, where it's like, hey, decisions need to be made. This is where everybody comes in and out. This is why we're here. Maybe that's it. I don't know. Anyway, he presents himself to the elders who are sitting there at the city gate. He tells them, it was an accident. Irving and I, we were out cutting trees. The tree fell on him. He died. I didn't mean it. Please don't let the Avenger of Blood get me. And they're like, okay, that sounds reasonable. You can come in until we can take care of setting up a trial. So, when Hosea gets into the city of Refuge, now the Avenger of Blood shows up and goes, I want to kill him because he killed my cousin Irving. No, we just accepted him in as a refugee. Oh, okay. And he walks off. Okay, now, one thing you really need to know. If Hosea popped up there and said, yeah, I killed Irving intentionally. Let me in for refuge. No, we're not letting you in for refuge. They would not take him in. Or say he got in somehow. They would expel him. Like, no, get out. This was not for somebody who committed actual murder. Okay? Now, if the Avenger of Blood would have caught up with Hosea before he got to the city of refuge, well, hasta la vista, Hosea, you're done. Okay? The Avenger of Blood is going to do what he is supposed to do. Okay? Now, after refuge, Hosea still has to stand trial. And it's uncertain how it worked. Both Joshua 20 and Numbers 35 indicate that it was the assembly that they would stand trial before. Perhaps that was the entirety of Israel, like it's referred to in other places in the Old Testament law. But then Deuteronomy 19 seems to indicate that it's just the elders of the killer city that would perform the trial, okay? And then there was another commentator who I think tried to meld the two of them together and said, no, it was the elders of the killer city and the elders of the city of refuge. They're the ones who held the trial. Regardless, there was a trial that happened, the facts came out, and if this person was indeed guilty of only manslaughter, it was an accidental killing, then they were given permanent refuge within the city of refuge. If they were found out to have lied and they had killed this person intentionally, then they again would be expelled. They would be given over to the city of the person who was murdered, and then they would be killed. I don't know whether it was by the city, by the community itself, or whether it was just by the family. Once a person was given refuge, though, they could not leave the city of refuge. If they did and they were out in the country, they were out beyond the borders of the city of refuge, they were fair game. The Avenger of Blood could sit outside the city for years if he wanted to, waiting for that person to walk out. And as soon as they walk out, he's like, you're mine now. And he could kill them and not be charged with murder. Now, there was one way in which the person could return to their hometown, which Joshua 20 says. When the high priest at that time died, then the person, the killer, could return to their own hometown, and the Avenger of Blood could do nothing about it. They could no longer exact revenge upon the person. Now, the location of the cities of refuge. Bob, can you bring up that picture, please? So, the locations of the cities of refuge, as you can see, there's 3 on one side of the Jordan and 3 on the other side of the Jordan, okay? Now, they were done in such a way that a person should be able to get to any one of them, or maybe more than one of them, in the course of one day. That way, if they were in between Shechem and Kadesh and they wound up killing somebody, they could run in either direction, okay? And again, like I said earlier, this is something that had to be done. They had to provide this so they could avoid blood guilt for the whole community of Israel. So in order to facilitate the people getting to refuge if they truly needed it, they would major infrastructure projects. Okay, it says the roads were super wide. The roads were super well cared for. The roads had signage, very obvious signage pointing which direction was the city of refuge. They would even go so far that they would raise the valleys and lower the hills in order to make it easier for a person to get to refuge. Again, the whole purpose behind that is they were trying to make it so that the blood guilt would not be brought on the entire community of Israel for the community not having provided an opportunity for people to seek refuge if they were innocent. You can take that away, Bob. Thank you. The other thing is this. Once a person was a refugee, they couldn't leave there. So, hey, Not like today where we know people in towns far away, we know people in states far away, we know people in nations far away. If you really didn't know the people outside of your town, you maybe knew people in the town next to you. But if you were running all the way to a city of refuge, there was a pretty good chance you didn't have a support network. So now you're a refugee, how are you going to support yourself? Well, the city was responsible for doing it. The elders were responsible for caring for you. In fact, there's even a part of the ancient Jewish mythology that says the mother of the high priest would wander around to the different cities of refuge, bringing supplies to the people who had sought refuge, because she wanted them to pray for her son's health. Because remember, when her son dies, they get to go home. So she's like, if I take care of them, then they'll pray for my son to live long. Or at least they won't pray for him to die fast. So it was necessary for the Israelites to provide a place for people to seek refuge for accidental, unintentional death, so that blood guilt would not come upon the entire community. Now, so what? That's great, KJ. It was a very nice historical walkthrough, some interesting contextual information, but here we are, 2019 America. What does that mean for me? Glad you asked. It's a great question, always. To me, I would say that the establishment of the cities of refuge for the ancient Jewish people is evidence. It's evidence of God's character, of his abounding grace and mercy, and that his grace, which is so freely given to us through Jesus the Messiah, should move us to respond to his grace. Okay, because let's face it, we're all guilty of things. Some of the things are trivial. Some of them are pretty horrible. Some of them are accidental. Some of them may have been intentional. But all of those things are violations of God's desire for us. Even in our faults and sins, though, when we run to God, he is exceedingly gracious, abundant in forgiveness, and holds us without blame and without penalty, all because of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. So often within the book of Psalms, we see the psalmists calling to God, saying, "You are my refuge, you are my rock, you are my hiding place." The psalmists are remembering God. They are remembering what he has done for them in their past. They are remembering him as that gracious refuge that has provided for them. And in that remembering of God as their refuge and strength, they are moved to respond to God with praise. To be blunt, friends, we have binary souls. We are either going to God or we are going away from God. We are either seeking him or fleeing from him. There's no in between. So in order to address the so what of what these cities of refuge mean to us today in 2019 America, I want to look at these two soul conditions. For those of us this morning that are fleeing from God, stop. Please, stop. Martin Luther famously referred to God as the hound of heaven, indicating that God was like a hound who had picked up a scent, constantly pursuing him and would not stop until found. But the problem is that so many people, when they think of God as the hound of heaven, when they hear those footsteps of the hound behind them, they're not thinking little bloodhound. They're thinking slobbering beast who's going to tear my flesh apart. But friends, that is not who God is. The hound of heaven is like Lassie, who is so dedicated, so devoted, so loving of you that they will go to anything, even to their own expense, to find you and rescue you. I think most of us here are of an age where we've probably at least heard of Lassie, if not seen it. Right? And think of all the times where Timmy got himself in some stupid situation And last he came and bailed him out. Friends, that is the hound of heaven. One who is devoted, one who loves, one who will pursue you without stopping until you know that he is for you and that he has rescued you. Jesus has proven his great love for you in his life, his death, and his resurrection. St. Augustine has been credited with saying that God loves each of us as if there were only one of us. And then Jesus famously told 3 parables in Luke chapter 15, indicating how much he loves each and every one of us. In the first one, there's a shepherd and he has 100 sheep, and one of the sheep goes missing, as dumb sheep are tend to do. And that shepherd leaves 99 sheep on the hillside to go find that one sheep that wandered off. And when he finds that one sheep, he comes back and he throws a party with everybody so they can see, I found my one sheep. It's not like he said, I got 99, one's fine. It's not like he found, it's like, you stupid sheep, don't tell anybody that you got lost. He's like, I found my sheep. Likewise, the parable right after that is about a woman who had 10 silver coins, and she lost one of them. And she tears her house apart trying to find that one coin. And when she finds it, she tells all her friends and she throws a party. I found my lost coin. But KJ, I've done things. I've done horrible things. I've done nasty things. I've done things that I wouldn't forgive. Why? And I am me. Why would God forgive them? Well, I'm not worthy of God's love. No, you're not. And neither am I. None of us are. We are none of us worthy of God's love. But that leads us to that last parable in Luke chapter 15. It's the parable of the lost son, or as many people know it, the prodigal son. And in this story, there is a man with 2 sons, and the younger son says to dad, hey, give me my inheritance, I'm out of here. Now, to us, we might think that's not such a big deal, okay, because kids are rude, right? But in that day, the oldest son got the majority of the inheritance. And not only that, the inheritance was never dealt out until the father died. So the younger son is essentially coming up to dad and saying, hey, I wish you were dead. Just kick off and give me the money. Now the father says, all right, if that's what you want, that's what you want. So the son takes the money, he runs out, goes to another country, parties like crazy, blows all of that money, and then finds himself homeless and hungry. And he hires himself out to somebody to feed pigs. Now, in Jewish culture, pigs are defiling, completely defiling. You don't eat them. Pigs are bad. And yet here he is feeding pigs, not just feeding pigs, looking at the pig food and saying, pig food. And at that point he realizes, man, my father's servants, the lowest of my father's servants, has food enough for days. I'm going to go back to my dad and say, just make me a servant. I don't want to be your son. I'm not worthy to be your son. Just make me a servant. But the story also goes on to say that, well, the boy was a long way off still. His dad saw him. Now, we all live in houses. We all know people are coming over. We're looking out the window occasionally to see if the person's coming, and sometimes we look at the window, oh, they're here. That's nice. But in order to be looking at the window to notice that they're here, what do you have to be doing? Spending your time watching for them. And to notice them from a long way off means that dad was sitting there looking hard for his, the father wanted his son back. He loved him. And that's how God feels about you. That's how he feels about each of us. There's nothing ever that we could do. We could tell God to die, and he's like, I did that. That's why I want you to come back. Don't ever think God doesn't love you. Doesn't matter if you're not worthy, because you are worthy. Not because of anything that you've done, not because of anything that you have not done either, but simply because God created you and loves you. God desires that we would all come to him. We've all heard John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he sent his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life. There's no asterisk there. There's no parentheses that gives a list of quid pro quos or things that you have to meet before God loves you enough to save you. No. God loved the whole world so that whoever believes in him should not perish. Jesus died to be our city of refuge. And he has paved the roads, he has flattened the mountains, he has raised the valleys, he's posted the signs, flung wide the gates, and invited all who are in danger to come to him for salvation and protection. The question is, have you done so? If you haven't, will you do so? Will you run to the one who is our perfect refuge? Now, some of you might say, okay, Job, I've done that. I'm one of those ones who's going after God, not fleeing God. Well, this is what that passage should mean to you. If Christian means little Christ, or of the party of Christ, should we not act and look like Jesus? And if Jesus is our city of refuge, should we not likewise be a refuge for those who are hurt, for those who are struggling, for those in need of protection and provision? Yes, absolutely. We should. We are to be a refuge to all people. And there is no shortage of direction in the Bible regarding this. Firstly, if our refuge is in Jesus, then we are to be known by our love, as John the Apostle records in his gospel. John also said in chapter 4 of his first letter, "Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God, and everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love." And this is how God showed his love among us. He sent his one and only Son into the world that we might live through him. This is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. Dear friends, John goes on, since God loved us, we also ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us, and his love is made complete in us. Jesus said it another way in Matthew chapter 25 when he was talking about the sheep and the goats. And he says, hey, whenever you saw somebody who was hungry or thirsty and you gave them food or drink, whenever you saw somebody who was naked and you gave them clothes, whenever you saw somebody who was in prison and you visited, whenever you saw somebody who was sick and you cared for them, you did those things for me. Because Jesus affiliates with the least, the defeated, the ones who feel they have no worth. They are the ones that Jesus associates most closely with. And frankly, if Jesus loved all of humanity like that, then we should too. Second is this: if our refuge is in Jesus, then we are to forgive as we have been forgiven. We live in a society where people increasingly are pursuing themselves, most often with complete disregard for how their choices are going to impact other people, which results in just great levels of giving and taking offense. I mean, let's be honest. Read anything on social media nowadays, and what are people? Ticked off at someone or something. But that's not how Jesus was. Jesus told us to turn the other cheek when someone strikes us. Jesus told us to go 2 miles when somebody compels us to go 1. Jesus told us to give somebody our shirt too if they take our coat. I mean, if you really doubt whether Jesus meant that, look at what happened on the cross. Jesus was not guilty. He was not worthy of torture. He was not worthy of crucifixion, and yet he willingly went because he loves us. And if he did that for us, how much more so should we, in thankfulness and a desire to repay that which we can never repay, do the same towards our fellow men who are also created in the image of God. Jesus did these things because he saw the greater glorification of God through his enduring the outrageous offense of his trial and execution. And if Jesus endured the offense of torture and death, how much more should we endure the offense of somebody cutting us off on the road? Somebody budging in line in the DMV? Somebody making a snide remark on social media? Or somebody marking our choice to do what is morally right over what is socially expedient? Let me say it another way, using the words of Jesus in Matthew chapter 6. For if you forgive other people when they sin against you, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others their sins, your Father will not forgive your sins. Lastly, if our refuge is in Jesus, then we are called to use our love and our forgiveness to fulfill our calling as ambassadors of reconciliation. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 11 to 21 says this: Since then we know what it is to fear the Lord, we try to persuade others. What we are is plain to God, and I hope it is plain to you, to your conscience. We are not trying to commend ourselves to you again, but are giving you an opportunity to take pride in us so that you can answer those who take pride in what is seen rather than in what is in the heart. For if we are out of our mind, as some say, it is for God. If we are in our right mind, it is for you. For Christ's love compels us because we are convinced that one died for all, and therefore all died. And he, Jesus, died for all, that those who live should no longer live for themselves, but for him who died for them and was raised again. So from now on, we regard no one from a worldly point of view. Though we once regarded Christ in this way, we do so no longer. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come, the old is gone, the new is here. All this is from God, who reconciled us to himself through Christ and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. That God was reconciling the world to himself in Christ, not counting people's sins against them. And he has committed to us the message of reconciliation. We are therefore Christ's ambassadors, as though God were making his appeal through us. We implore you on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God. God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. Friends, ambassadors don't tend to sit inside their consulates waiting for people to come to them so they can promote their country's interests. No, ambassadors go out. They leave. They go to the people that matter in order to say, hey, this is what my country's about. And that's what Jesus is asking us to do as ambassadors of reconciliation. We should be out in the world. It should be known that we are people of love and grace and the attendant peace that accompanies those things. We are not to passively sit around waiting for people to come to us so that we can share Jesus. Instead, we should be out living the life that Jesus did. Being people of peace, bringing blessing and grace to others, even at our personal expense. For everywhere we go, we take Christ, the city of refuge, with us. And people won't need to run far to the city if the city's already running towards them. So where does all this leave you today? Perhaps you've been sitting there and you've had the butterflies in your stomach, the twitchy hands, the elevated heart rate, the shallow breathing, and you know you're not sick. Friends, that's the hound of heaven. He's knocking. He wants you to pay attention to him. And I'll be honest. If you want, you can ignore it. It'll go away. Maybe in a couple minutes, maybe in a couple hours, maybe in a couple of days. But I tell you, if you ignore it, it will be to your detriment. Because the next time he comes knocking, you're going to be less likely to hear it. So friends, if the hound of heaven, if God is there knocking and giving you the giblies, and he wants you to pay attention today, don't turn away from it. Turn into it. If he's telling you, hey, listen, you're not following me. You're not seeking after me. You're not coming after me. Don't run anymore. He's not a rabid dog who's going to destroy you. He's the dog that wants to love you and lick you and show you how much you are cared for. If you are following after Jesus and you've been feeling that, then that means there's something going on in your life that is not right, that he wants to sort out. I encourage you today, take the time. We'll be up front here. We will pray with you. We will pray for you. Our hope is that we would all embrace this call that Jesus has made on our lives, that he loves us, he wants to restore us, he wants to reconcile us, he wants to be our refuge during these times of struggle. But he's not going to force you. He's going to ask. And it's going to be your choice whether you respond or not.